The reason for building Göbekli Tepe, according to Thoth, an audiobook experience. Imagine standing on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, not far from the city of Şanlıurfa, where the air itself feels older than time. The soil beneath your feet has been concealing a secret for nearly 12,000 years, a secret so profound that when archaeologists first brushed away the dust in 1994, they found themselves staring at the dawn of civilization itself. But here is the question that has haunted every researcher who has walked this site. What if we have been looking at Göbekli Tepe through the wrong eyes? What if the answer to its purpose was never meant to be found in shards of pottery or carbon-dated seeds, but in the whispered teachings of a god who existed long before Egypt raised its first pyramid? This is the story of Göbekli Tepe, not as archaeology understands it, but as Thoth remembers it. Before we step into the mind of the ibis-headed god, we must first understand what we are dealing with. Göbekli Tepe is not merely old, it is impossibly old. It was built at the very end of the last ice age, a time when woolly mammoths still roamed parts of the earth and sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Mainstream history tells us that humans then were simple hunter-gatherers, living in small nomadic bands, chasing herds and foraging for berries. They had not yet invented writing, they had not yet domesticated wheat, and they certainly had no business carving 5-ton stones into intricate animal shapes and arranging them in perfect geometric circles. And yet, that is exactly what they did. The site consists of multiple circular enclosures, each one formed by massive T-shaped limestone pillars connected by stone benches and walls. The pillars are decorated with bas-reliefs of foxes, snakes, scorpions, boars, vultures, and spiders, all rendered with a sophistication that should not exist in a world we consider primitive. The sheer scale of the undertaking defies belief. Archaeologists estimate that moving just one of these pillars from the quarry to the enclosure would have required hundreds of people pulling together with ropes made of plant fiber, dragging the stone across miles of open country. And yet, there are 20 such pillars in the oldest layer alone, with many more waiting to be excavated. This was not the work of a handful of hungry nomads stopping to build a shrine between meals. This was a project that required organization, leadership, and a unifying vision powerful enough to bring scattered tribes together for generations. The standard explanation, the one you will read in textbooks and museum placards, is that Göbekli Tepe was a ceremonial center, or a temple, where prehistoric people gathered for rituals and feasts. But that answer feels thin, does it not? It tells us what they did, but it does not tell us why. It describes the mechanics, but ignores the soul. To understand the why, we must turn to a source that mainstream archaeology refuses to touch. We must listen to Thoth. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this figure, Thoth is the ancient Egyptian deity of wisdom, writing, magic, and the measurement of time. He is usually depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, holding a stylus and palette with which he records the deeds of the dead in the Hall of Judgment. But Thoth is much more than a scribe. In the Egyptian cosmology, he is the self-begotten one, the tongue of Ptah, the divine word that speaks creation into existence. He is the keeper of the sacred sciences, the master of numbers and geometry, the one who knows the hidden names of all things. The Greeks identified him with Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great author of esoteric writings that would later influence alchemy, astrology, and Western mysticism. Thoth is, in short, the god of knowledge itself. Now, you might be asking yourself what an ancient Egyptian god has to do with a Turkish hilltop that predates Egyptian civilization by 6,000 years. That is precisely the point. If Thoth truly is the timeless source of wisdom, then his knowledge is not confined to the banks of the Nile. It is older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older than any civilization we have recorded. And if we take seriously the idea that Göbekli Tepe was built by people who possessed a spiritual tradition far more ancient than we acknowledge, then it is not so strange to suggest that the same spiritual current that later surfaced in Egypt was already flowing at Göbekli Tepe. The forms would be different, the symbols would be adapted to a different time and place, but the underlying truth would remain the same. And the key to unlocking that truth, I believe, is carved into the most famous pillar at the site, a pillar that mainstream archaeology has completely misidentified. Let us look closely at Pillar 43, often called the Vulture Stone. It stands in Enclosure D, and its surface is covered with a dense arrangement of animals and symbols. At the center, a large bird spreads its wings. To the left, a scorpion crawls. To the right, a headless figure crouches. Above them, a circle and a crescent hang in what looks like a celestial arrangement. Below, a row of what appear to be birds without heads line the bottom. When archaeologists first studied this pillar, they saw a vulture, and because vultures are associated with death and sky burials in some cultures, they concluded that the scene must represent some kind of mortuary ritual. Later, a more dramatic interpretation emerged, suggesting that the vulture and the other animals might represent constellations and that the pillar was actually a memorial to a comet strike that occurred around 10,950 BC, an event that some scientists believe triggered a mini ice age and reshaped human history. Both interpretations are interesting, and both may contain fragments of truth, but neither sees what is really there. What if that bird is not a vulture at all? What if we have been looking at it with eyes conditioned by European and Near Eastern symbolism, unable to recognize an image that belongs to a different symbolic language entirely? The bird has a long, curved beak, not a short, hooked beak of a vulture. Its body is slender, not bulky, and most importantly, its neck is twisted in an unnatural way. Its legs are broken, its beak is chipped, and its rib cage is missing. These are not random injuries. They are specific details that match with astonishing precision the traditional Egyptian method of ibis mummification. When the ancient Egyptians prepared an ibis as an offering to Thoth, they would break its neck to kill it, snap its legs to fold them against its body, break the tip of its beak, and remove the internal organs through an incision that left the rib cage empty. The bird on Pillar 43 is not a living creature soaring through the sky. It is a mummified ibis, wrapped and preserved for the journey through the underworld. It is Thoth in his funerary form, the god who guides souls through the perilous regions of the Duat. This single realization changes everything. If the central figure is Thoth, then the entire pillar must be reinterpreted in light of Egyptian funerary mythology. And when we do that, the other symbols begin to make sense in ways that no one has previously considered. Take those strange H-shaped symbols that appear throughout Göbekli Tepe, carved into pillars and stone slabs. Mainstream archaeology has no clear explanation for them. They are called H-pillars or H-symbols, and researchers generally describe them as abstract representations of the human form or as stylized forms of the T-shaped pillars themselves. But look again through the eyes of Thoth. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the underworld is divided into 12 distinct regions, each separated by massive gates. These gates are guarded by terrifying demons, serpent-headed beings armed with knives, scorpions, and flames. To pass through, the deceased must speak the secret name of the gate and appease its guardian. The gates are often depicted as doorways with a specific architectural form, and in many tomb paintings and papyri, they are represented by a symbol that bears a striking resemblance to the H symbols at Göbekli Tepe. Now look at the animals surrounding the ibis on Pillar 43. There is a fox, there is what appears to be a snake or an eel, there are birds that may represent souls, there is a headless man who could be the deceased awaiting judgment. They are not randomly arranged decorations. They are placed in specific positions around the central figure, almost as if they are standing guard or blocking the way. This is exactly how the gates of the Duat are depicted in Egyptian art. The deceased approaches the gate, and the guardian demon confronts him. If the animal on Pillar 43 is a fox, it is not just any fox, it is the fox that guards the first gate. If it is a snake, it is the snake that spits fire at the fifth gate. Each creature has a role, each one must be negotiated with, and at the center, guiding the entire process, stands Thoth in his mummified form, the ultimate psychopomp who knows the words of power that open all gates. What we are looking at then is not a comet memorial or a simple hunting scene. We are looking at a map of the underworld carved in stone at the very dawn of civilization. And if Pillar 43 is a map, then Göbekli Tepe itself must be something far more profound than a temple. It must be a physical representation of that underworld, a sacred landscape designed to allow the living to enter the realm of the dead and return transformed. The circular enclosures, with their stone benches and looming central pillars, are not meeting halls for feasting. They are the chambers of the Duat, the sacred spaces where initiates could undergo the same journey that the sun makes each night, descending into darkness, confronting the guardians, and emerging reborn at dawn. This is why the pillars are arranged in circles. This is why they are decorated with theriomorphic beings. This is why the site was built with such incredible care and then, at some point, deliberately buried. It was not abandoned, it was sealed, preserved like a tomb, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to understand what lies within. Does this interpretation fit with what we know about prehistoric religion? More than you might think. Archaeologists have found abundant evidence at Göbekli Tepe for what they call a skull cult. Fragments of human crania make up a significant portion of the bone assemblage, far more than would be expected from normal burial practices. Some of these skulls were carved with deep grooves, possibly to suspend them, and they show signs of having been displayed and handled repeatedly. In many traditional societies, the skulls of ancestors are treated as powerful objects, repositories of spiritual force that can be consulted for guidance and protection. The people of Göbekli Tepe were not just venerating their dead, they were keeping them present, using their remains as focal points for rituals that bridged the worlds. Imagine entering one of those dark enclosures, lit only by flickering torches, the air thick with smoke and incense. The T-shaped pillars loom above you like silent giants, their stone surfaces glowing with the carved forms of lions and vultures. And hanging from the walls or arranged on the benches are the skulls of the honored dead, their empty eye sockets staring into a world you cannot see. You are not in a temple, you are in the underworld, and the ancestors are watching. This brings us to a deeper question, one that touches on the very nature of human consciousness and our relationship with the divine. Why would prehistoric people go to such lengths to build a physical model of the underworld? What need were they trying to satisfy? The answer, according to the wisdom tradition that Thoth represents, is that the journey through death is not something that happens only at the end of life. It is a process that must be understood and mastered while we are still alive. The Egyptians called this process the transformation into an Ach, an effective spirit, one who has conquered death and gained the power to move freely between the worlds. But that transformation requires knowledge. It requires knowing the names of the gates, the words that silence the guardians, the spells that turn aside the demons. And that knowledge must be preserved, passed down from generation to generation, and coded in symbols and rituals that can survive the collapse of empires and the forgetting of languages. Göbekli Tepe, from this perspective, was a university of the soul. It was a place where initiates were trained in the mysteries of death and rebirth, where they learned to navigate the landscape of the underworld while still in their physical bodies. The enclosures were classrooms, the pillars were textbooks, and the animals carved into them were the lessons themselves. When an initiate looked at the fox, he did not see a simple predator. He saw the guardian of the first gate, the one who tests the heart for truth. When he looked at the scorpion, He saw the demon whose sting is the fear of death, the illusion that must be overcome. And when he looked at the ibis with its broken neck and folded legs, he saw Thoth himself, the guide who had already made the journey and now waited to lead others through. Now, I want to pause here and check in with you. This is a lot to take in, I know, and we have only just begun to scratch the surface. The next section will take us deeper into the symbolism of the enclosures themselves, exploring how their architecture mirrors the structure of the Duat and what that means for our understanding of ancient spirituality. We will also look at the astronomical alignments built into the site and how they connect to the Egyptian concept of time and the cycles of the cosmos. But before we go further, I need to know, would you like me to continue with the next section? We must now descend into the architecture itself, for if Göbekli Tepe is truly a model of the underworld, then every stone, every bench, every carefully placed pillar has meaning. The enclosures are not haphazardly arranged. They are oriented with precision, their entrances facing specific directions, their internal structures echoing a cosmology that we have only begun to understand. When you stand at the center of one of these circles, you are not standing in a random clearing. You are standing at the navel of the world, the axis mundi, the point where the heavens meet the earth and the underworld opens its mouth to receive the worthy. Consider enclosure D, the largest and best preserved of the excavated circles. Its central pillars are the tallest at the site, towering nearly 18 feet above the bedrock. They face each other across the open space, their T-shaped tops suggesting human shoulders and heads, though their bodies are blank stone. Archaeologists call them stylized humans, and perhaps they are, but they are not ordinary humans. They are the primordial beings, the ancestral spirits, the gods who existed before the separation of heaven and earth. In the Egyptian tradition, these would be the Ogdoad, the 8 primordial deities who swam in the waters of chaos before creation. In the Mesopotamian tradition, they would be the Anunnaki, the judges of the underworld. But here at Göbekli Tepe, they have no names that we can pronounce, no myths that we can recite. They stand in silence, waiting for us to remember. The benches that line the walls of the enclosure are not merely places to sit, they are the thresholds between worlds. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the deceased must approach the bench of judgment, where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. The 42 assessors sit on such benches, each one representing a nome of Egypt, each one demanding that the deceased declare his innocence of a specific sin. The benches at Göbekli Tepe could hold dozens of people, perhaps the elders of the tribe, perhaps the initiates who had already passed through the gates and now served as assessors for the new arrivals. When you sat on that bench, you were not resting, you were judging. You were participating in the drama of the soul's transition, holding the space for transformation to occur. And then there are the animals. Oh, the animals. They cover the pillars in profusion, carved in high relief with a sensitivity that rivals the best work of any civilization. Foxes leap, snakes coil, boars charge, vultures spread their wings, spiders stretch their legs. But these are not merely decorative. They are not hunting trophies or clan totems. They are the guardians, the demons, the powers that must be confronted and understood. Each animal carries a specific symbolic weight, a meaning that would have been immediately recognizable to the initiate. The fox, for example, is cunning, intelligence without wisdom, the trickster who leads the soul astray with false promises. The boar is brute force, the aggression that must be tamed. The vulture is the purifier, the one who strips away the flesh to reveal the bones, the essence that survives death. And the spider is the weaver of fate, the spinner of the thread that connects all things, the one who sits at the center of the web and watches. But there is one animal that appears more frequently than any other, and its presence tells us something crucial about the nature of the site. I am speaking of the snake. Snakes are everywhere at Göbekli Tepe.
coiled on pillars, slithering across stone slabs, their bodies forming patterns that seem to move in the flickering light. In most ancient cultures, snakes are ambivalent symbols. They represent both death and rebirth, poison and healing, the chthonic depths and the celestial heights. They shed their skin and are renewed, making them perfect symbols of the transformation that the initiate seeks. But here at Göbekli Tepe, the snakes may have an even more specific meaning. In the Egyptian tradition, the snake is the enemy of the sun god Ra, the demon Apep who tries to devour the solar bark each night as it travels through the underworld. To pass through the Duat, the deceased must help Ra defeat Apep, must join in the cosmic battle against the serpent of chaos. The snakes at Göbekli Tepe are not just symbols, they are obstacles. They are the challenges that the soul must overcome, the fears that must be faced, the illusions that must be shattered. Now let us consider the astronomical dimensions of the site, for the underworld is not only a place, but also a time. The Egyptians understood that the journey of the sun through the night sky mirrored the journey of the soul through the Duat. Each hour of darkness corresponded to a specific region of the underworld, and the stars themselves were the souls of the blessed dead, shining in the belly of Nut, the sky goddess.
At Göbekli Tepe, the alignments are unmistakable. The enclosures are oriented toward specific points on the horizon, points that mark the rising and setting of important stars. Recent research has shown that the site may have been aligned with the constellation of Orion, the celestial counterpart of Osiris, the god of resurrection. It may also have been aligned with Sirius, the star of Isis, whose heliacal rising heralded the flooding of the Nile and the promise of new life. These are not coincidences. These are deliberate choices encoded in stone by people who understood the movements of the heavens with a precision that we have only recently rediscovered. But let us go deeper still, for the stars themselves are not the ultimate reality. In the wisdom tradition of Thoth, the stars are the visible bodies of the invisible gods, the manifestations of principles that transcend the physical universe. When the initiate at Göbekli Tepe looked up at the night sky, he did not see balls of burning gas. He saw the souls of the ancestors, the blessed dead who had successfully navigated the underworld and now shone as guides for those who followed. He saw the constellations as stories, each one a teaching, each one a map of the inner journey. And when he looked at the pillars around him, he saw the same stories carved in stone, the same teachings made visible in the physical world. The enclosure was a microcosm, a miniature universe, a place where heaven and earth touched and became one. This brings us to a realization that is both beautiful and terrifying. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not primitive savages fumbling toward civilization. They were the inheritors of a wisdom tradition that stretched back into an unimaginable past, a tradition that understood the nature of consciousness, the structure of the soul, and the process of transformation with a clarity that we have lost. They built Göbekli Tepe not because they were trying to invent religion, but because they were trying to preserve it. They were living in a time of crisis, a time when the world itself was changing. The ice age was ending, the climate was warming, the great herds were disappearing, and the old ways of life were becoming impossible. Something had to be done to ensure that the knowledge did not die with them. So they built a temple that was also a university, a tomb that was also a womb, a place where the mysteries could be stored until humanity was ready to receive them again. And then they buried it. This is one of the most puzzling aspects of Göbekli Tepe. At some point after centuries of use, the enclosures were deliberately filled in with tons of rubble, buried so completely that they remained hidden for 10,000 years. Why would anyone do such a thing? The mainstream explanation is that the site was abandoned and the fill accumulated naturally, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The fill was brought in deliberately, carefully placed, as if the enclosures were being sealed like tombs. In the wisdom tradition, this act of burial has profound significance. It is the equivalent of planting a seed, placing the knowledge in the earth so that it can germinate and grow, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. The Egyptians did the same thing with their sacred texts, burying them with the dead so that they would be available in the afterlife. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not destroying their temple. They were preserving it, entrusting it to the earth, the great mother who holds all things until they are needed again. And now, after 10,000 years, the seed has sprouted. We have uncovered the enclosures. We have marveled at the pillars. We have puzzled over the symbols. But have we understood them? That is the question that hangs over all of archaeology, all of history, all of our attempts to reach back into the past and grasp the minds of those who came before. We look at the stones and see art. We look at the animals and see mythology. We look at the alignments and see astronomy. But do we see the soul? Do we see the living reality that animated these stones, that gave them meaning and power? The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not trying to communicate with us. They were trying to communicate with the gods, with the ancestors, with the depths of their own being. We are eavesdroppers, overhearing a conversation that was never meant for our ears. And yet, here we are, listening. Perhaps that is exactly what was intended. Perhaps the seed was always meant to sprout at this moment, in this time of crisis and transformation. We are living through our own end of an ice age, our own collapse of old certainties, our own desperate need for wisdom that can guide us through the darkness. The world is changing faster than we can adapt. The old stories are failing, and we are searching for something solid to hold on to. Göbekli Tepe rises out of the earth like an answer to a question we have not yet learned to ask. It stands there silent and patient, waiting for us to remember what we have forgotten. And in the ibis carved on Pillar 43, with its broken neck and folded legs, we see the face of Thoth, the god who never dies, the wisdom that never fades, the guide who waits at the threshold of every underworld, ready to lead us through. But we must be willing to follow. We must be willing to leave behind our assumptions, our theories, our carefully constructed models of the past. We must be willing to enter the enclosure, to sit on the bench, to face the fox and the scorpion and the snake. We must be willing to die before we die, to undergo the transformation that the initiates underwent 10,000 years ago, to become the ancestors who will guide those who come after us. That is the purpose of Göbekli Tepe. That is the reason it was built, not to worship gods, but to become them, not to remember the dead, but to join them, not to map the underworld, but to walk through it and emerge on the other side, reborn, transformed, shining like a star in the belly of the night. And so we return to the beginning, to that windswept hill in southeastern Turkey, where the stones stand silent, waiting. We came here with a question: why was Göbekli Tepe built? We leave now with an answer, though perhaps not the kind of answer that can be measured in a laboratory or published in a peer-reviewed journal. The answer given by Thoth is not an archaeological report. It is an invitation. It is a mirror held up to the soul, asking us to see ourselves in the faces of those who came before. What Thoth reveals is that Göbekli Tepe was never about the stones. The stones are merely the container, the shell, the outward form of something that cannot be excavated. What was built there, what was preserved there, what was buried there for 10,000 years was a map of consciousness itself. The enclosures are not rooms, they are states of being. The pillars are not gods, they are stages of transformation. The animals are not demons, they are the aspects of ourselves that must be confronted, understood, and ultimately transcended. Göbekli Tepe is not a temple to something outside of us. It is a temple to something within us, something so deep and so ancient that we have forgotten it entirely. And that forgetting was necessary. The builders of Göbekli Tepe knew that the time would come when humanity would no longer understand the language of the ibis and the fox, when the stars would become balls of gas instead of ancestors, when the underworld would become a fairy tale instead of a journey. They buried their knowledge not to hide it, but to preserve it, trusting that the earth would keep it safe until the moment when it was needed again. That moment, I believe, is now. We stand at the edge of our own abyss, watching the old certainties crumble around us, feeling the ground shift beneath our feet. The climate is changing. The old stories are dying. The gods we worshipped, the gods of progress and technology and endless consumption, have failed us. And in that failure, in that emptiness, a space opens, a space where something ancient and forgotten can return. What Thoth offers us is not a new religion. It is not a set of beliefs to adopt or a doctrine to follow. It is a method, a way of seeing, a lens through which the world becomes transparent to the divine. When you look at a pillar at Göbekli Tepe, you are not looking at a rock. You are looking at a teaching. When you trace the outline of the ibis with your eyes, you are not looking at a bird. You are looking at the guide who stands at the threshold of death, waiting to lead you through. When you feel the weight of the stones pressing down on you, you are not standing in an enclosure. You are standing in the underworld, and the ancestors are watching, and the gates are opening, and the journey is beginning. This is the reason Göbekli Tepe was built. Not to commemorate an event, not to worship a god, not to mark a territory or celebrate a harvest. It was built to remind us, across the vast gulf of time, that we are more than we think we are, that death is not the end, but a transition, that the soul is real, that the journey matters, that the gates open for those who are prepared to walk through them. The builders could have built anything. They could have built houses or walls or granaries. Instead, they built a map of the underworld, carved in stone, buried in the earth, waiting for us to find it. And we have found it. The question now is whether we have the courage to enter. Because entering means leaving behind the comfortable certainties of the material world. It means admitting that consciousness is not a byproduct of brain chemistry, but the fundamental fabric of reality. It means facing the fox and the scorpion and the snake within ourselves, the fears and desires and illusions that keep us trapped in the cycle of birth and death. It means dying before we die, undergoing the transformation that the initiates underwent 10,000 years ago, emerging on the other side, not as the same person, but as something new, something luminous, something that shines in the darkness like a star. The ibis stands at the center of Pillar 43, broken yet eternal. So too do you stand at the center of your own transformation. The gates of the underworld are not beneath the earth. They are within you, waiting to be opened. If this journey has stirred something ancient in your soul, help us awaken others. Please help our channel grow and spread the message by like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop a comment and tell us what you would ask Thoth if you stood before the gates yourself. Your question may become our next video. Thank you for being with us.